What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, January 24th, 2017. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Quick little program note, Wayne Madsen will be our guest in the third hour talking about his new book on CIA front companies and a couple of other issues that are starting to develop here right now. So we're certainly looking forward to that. Now then, getting on into the news, Donald Trump has decided to keep James Comey on as the director of the FBI. And I think what's going on here is looking back at Comey during the last few months of Obama's administration, it was pretty obvious that he was not comfortable. The position that he was put in by Loretta Lynch and by Barack Obama regarding Hillary Clinton. And I think that maybe Donald Trump, not being a career politician, is not rooted in ideology. He's a businessman, and he's looking for the people he thinks can really do the job. And so he's keeping on James Comey, but James Comey will not be hamstrung by the new incoming Attorney General, and will probably be looking to vindicate his image, his reputation after what happened. But Donald Trump has to walk a very fine line here, because any attempt to prosecute Hillary Clinton for her numerous crimes will inevitably draw screeches from the liberals and the Democrats that he's out for revenge, it's payback and get even. So Donald Trump, of course, is saying he's not interested in revenge, and I think the plan, if I read it correctly, is to build an absolutely airtight case so that anybody looking at it, even the snowflakes and the buttercups, are going to look at it and say, yes, Hillary broke the law, and like any other American citizen, ought to pay for it. I am still very much wondering if Hillary Clinton was indeed replaying the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling American secrets to foreign interests, using her weak private email server to deliver the information, and her so-called charitable foundation to collect and launder the money. It's a legitimate question. So some people are looking at this and saying that, yeah, Comey's staying on, he knows where the dirt is, he knows where to head the investigation, and indictments will soon be coming. Now, we know that Hillary will never be charged with her worst crimes, such as the one I just raised, because that could delegitimize the entire government. But I'm sure Donald Trump is realizing that if he doesn't deal with Hillary, it's going to be seen as one of his campaign promises that he broke. And the DNC is already talking about the 2020 election, and amazingly enough, Hillary's name is on the list to run again. And I'm sure that Donald Trump would rather not do that. They're talking about Hillary running for mayor of New York City as a stepping stone to her second attempt to gain the White House. Now, the Democrats are seeking a delay on the confirmation vote for Senator Jeff Sessions to be the new Attorney General. They want time to do their due diligence, and obviously whoever occupies the position of Attorney General is of supreme importance, especially to those who are engaged in corruption and espionage and want to be able to control the investigation the way Loretta Lynch did. Now, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee split along party lines, but did succeed in endorsing Rex Tillerson as our next Secretary of State. They're setting up a confirmation vote in the full Senate, which is pretty much assumed it will go forward. The Senate has now confirmed Mike Pompeo as the new director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and it was one of the closest confirmation votes so far. And I'm not entirely thrilled with Mike being director of the CIA, because he's fully on board with this surveillance of law-abiding American people, which I see as not only being a violation of the Fourth Amendment, but a hideous waste of resources to spy on people who aren't actually doing anything, which is the vast majority of us. And over at uns.com, they're running a story about the neocon lament. All these neocons who rose to power back during that Project for the New American Century, and they shaped America's militarist foreign policy, and now nobody wants them anymore. And they've gone back to their little ivory castles, their think tanks and their policy groups, and they're sitting there by the phone and nobody's calling. And they're out there saying, look, my opposition to Trump, that was just business. It's not personal. Why isn't Trump calling me? Well, obviously Trump doesn't think you're qualified for the job he needs to do here. Now, we were talking the other day about how all of the liberal crybabies are just in a panic over Hillary's election loss. And they're out there. There was a video we put up on the front page about this woman at a Starbucks who just comes unhinged about all the horrible things that are going to happen. We're going to take a moment here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And the problem here, though, is that the Democrats and Hillary had a very simple campaign strategy. They were going to invent this horrible monster. It was a myth. And then they were going to offer to protect the liberal voters from this imaginary monster in exchange for money and votes. And now we're dealing with the aftermath of all of this negative imagery about Donald Trump, none of which is true. This claim that he was going to declare a war on women, I mean, that's ridiculous here. They're out there still screaming that he's going to tear down the campaign against human-caused global warming, which he is, but that too was a hoax. That was this imaginary monster, this threat that was out there, human-caused global warming, and I, Al Gore, will save you from it in exchange for money, and you buy my carbon credits and you see my movies. We'll be talking about his new movie a little bit later in the show here. The war on minorities that they were trying to put on out there, the war on Muslims. There was no war on minorities and Muslims. There was a war on illegal immigration, and I emphasize that first word, illegal. They came on out and said Donald Trump was going to make war on the LGBT community. What's the worst that could happen? We're going to go back to a nation with just two genders, and everybody uses the correct bathroom. Then there was the big one, the Russian takeover of the U.S. government, that Trump was a puppet for Vladimir Putin, that he was going to run the United States for the benefit of Russia, and everybody knows that the United States is supposed to be run for the benefit of Israel. Then they had this one where Donald Trump was going to declare war on the poor. That one's already falling apart. He's bringing the jobs back by the millions. There was the claim that Donald Trump was going to see a resurgent Ku Klux Klan striding across the country. And it was all made up. I mean, before Donald Trump's been in the public eye for over 30 years. And he was never accused of any of these things until he started to run for president. And then the corporate media uncorked on him, just making stuff up. I mean, they were so desperate to smear him, they went back and found where his father had been arrested at a KKK riot 9 years before Donald was even born, and they couldn't even establish that Donald's father was actually part of the KKK. He was just there. He got caught up in it. And he was arrested and immediately released, so obviously the police didn't find anything. But the full court press against Donald Trump is continuing. Now, apparently, the activists who are behind this fantasy to impeach Donald Trump before he's ever actually done anything are tied in with George Soros. Once again, we see George Soros acting as if his billions give him a right to mess around with our country, to mess around with our people, to mess around with the entire world. There's a new petition up on the White House petition website to issue an international arrest warrant for George Soros. I mean, he has actually committed violations of the USA Patriot Act. He should be arrested. He has caused all kinds of harm to our nation's image around the world, to our political system, along with the physical damage from all these staged riots. The pettiness of the liberals is on full display here. And that's why I think that if there is a new Maidan, if somebody's trying to do a color revolution in the United States of America, it will fail. Because for any of these color revolutions to work, the people doing the rioting, protesting, the civil unrest, have to be seen as sympathetic by the general public. They can't do it without popular support. And the public image that is being broadcast of these liberals is not sympathetic. People don't agree with them. People don't sympathize with them. They don't identify with them, and hence they will not support them. And they are, in fact, getting childish. Apparently, on the inauguration, Melania Trump was in this very beautiful blue dress that was apparently created for her by Ralph Lauren. And now the liberals are saying we have to boycott Ralph Lauren because he's supporting oppression. So I guess it's time to buy a new bottle of Polo. There is no oppression. That was the big liberal selling point. Your life is not a success because you are being oppressed by this imaginary monster up on the wall that we painted for you. And if you will support us financially and politically, we'll save you from the imaginary monster. It's called the Hegelian dialectic, if you want the fancy name for it here. We're seeing a story that's coming out of the Duran.com. Apparently, there is a new Hollywood blacklist. If you were wondering why so many of these has-been actors were out there screaming about Hillary's the real president and Donald Trump's this and Donald Trump's that, apparently there is now a blacklist against any actors and celebrities who fail to march in goose step with the campaign against Donald Trump. Apparently Nicole Kidman, following her comments about, look, it's over, he won, let's get used to it, has had 2 of her contracts canceled. That blacklist is a very real thing. I have felt its wrath myself here. Meanwhile, Gerald Celente is out there saying that he's just totally disgusted by De Niro, George Clooney, and Hollywood in general for backing the murdering and drug smuggling Clinton cartel. And I am as well. Now, these are people who think their celebrity status means that you value their opinion about things that have nothing to do with entertainment. And they're starting to really cry when they realize that, no, we don't value their opinion because they spend all their time acting, play acting, make-believe, makeup, cameras, lights, and that's what they do. They are not serious students of contemporary political history. Their opinions are basically jingoism, the slogans, the latest press statements, whatever is trendy and fashionable. That's what we're doing now. And they're not experts in politics. And no, we're not paying attention to their opinion. That was another shock revelation of this last election. The star power didn't work for Hillary. Now, Chelsea Handler is a talk media star, and she led the Women's March at the Sundance Film Festival, and she was being interviewed by Variety's Elizabeth Wagmeister, saying, would she ever interview Donald Trump? And Chelsea Handler said, absolutely not. Then she was hit with a follow-up question she wasn't expecting, would she ever consider interviewing Melania Trump? And Chelsea Handler came back and said, Melania, to talk about what? She can barely speak English. So much for tolerance. Now, on Chelsea's previous show, they had an ongoing character of a Mexican played by an actor, Choi Bravo, and they made fun of his accent as part of the shtick on the show. And here's a little bit of a reminder. Melania Trump speaks 6 languages: English, French, Italian, German, Serbo-Croatian, and her native Slovene. Now then, you remember Larry King's rented limousine got destroyed, set on fire by the Get Donald Trump people. And Larry King was not in it at the time, fortunately. And it's not like Larry King was a huge supporter of Donald Trump. Quite the contrary. Why are they going after his car? But it actually gets even worse. These tolerant, all-inclusive, love Trumps all, we love the illegal immigrants coming on in, trashed a very expensive limousine that was owned by a Muslim immigrant and being driven by a Latino immigrant. It's like after the election was over and they all rioted in the cities that had voted for Hillary Clinton. Meanwhile, apparently over at the inaugural ball, these 2 Gold Star family members who run the Travis Manion Foundation were basically harassed outside the Veterans Inaugural Ball, and apparently they were being pushed, they were spit on, people were calling them names. Like I said, the public image that is being put out about these crybabies is not one that is going to win popular opinion over to their point of view. Now then, as we mentioned yesterday, more than 200 of these Inauguration Day rioters are facing felony rioting charges. And they can go to prison for up to 10 years and a $25,000 fine. Now, already we're seeing the liberal media go on out there saying, oh, see, it shows that Trump is going to repress freedom of speech, and he's just going to come down hard on protesters. Well, let's clear something up here before it gets out of hand here. When you are standing or walking down the street with signs and being peaceful, that is a protest. Because it is peaceful, and because it's peaceful, it is protected free speech under the First Amendment. What happened in Washington, D.C. was a riot. Burning of cars, smashing of windows. That's not protected free speech under the First Amendment. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have a right to destroy private property because the election didn't go the way that you wanted. If you want a description for it, that's insurrection. Now, over at George Washington University Law School, Professor John Banzhaf was interviewed on Breitbart and saying felony rioting charges could provide genuine deterrent effect on future anarchists. And he is correct. I mean, we don't want to suppress peaceful freedom of speech, but these people were just violent. They were causing damage. They were committing assault and battery. But, that being said, I think Donald Trump would be well advised after they've had their day in court and been convicted and sentenced. I think it would be smart for Trump to commute their sentences. Use his little clemency pen. Because the last thing Donald Trump needs is 200 of these snowflakes in prison as martyrs to the liberal cause. So you should just kick them out. Take away their fangs, as it were. Here's how ridiculous those protesters got. Apparently in front of the Trump Hotel, there were protesters there. One of them had a heart attack. And the hotel staff rushed out to try and save this guy and got booed and harassed by the other protesters. I mean, it really is ridiculous. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here from Bill in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind today? Bill, are you there?
Yeah. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing fine. What can we do for you?
Well, first, I wanted to give you a compliment. I was try to listen to you every day, or I watch you on YouTube, and you gave Alex Jones a compliment. a lot of listeners that you have, like myself, like really love your show, but, you know, it takes a big guy to just say, you know, Alex is one of the pioneers.
Hello?
Really nice of you to say that, man. That was really cool.
Thought we lost you there for a second here.
And,
well, again, it is very important right now that as the independent media becomes influential in our society, the corporate media wants to find ways to tear us apart, and we all have to pull together, and we all have to treat each other with respect. And again, I personally don't have a problem with a diversity of opinion, because that's what media is supposed to present to the public, so that everybody can read Alex Jones' opinion on this and that, and then read my opinion on this and that, and somebody else's opinion, and then they can come to their own conclusion, because that's what a free media is supposed to do.
Nah, that's really cool. I did have something funny I wanted to add, though.
Yes?
And then I have one more thing to say, because I know I don't have much time, but what happened to, you know, their side of the story when they promised us? They promised us that if Trump won, Whoopi Goldberg, The View, The Crew, the whatever it was, all these left-wing whack job celebrities were going to leave the country. Man, they didn't keep their promise. I was sitting around waiting to see the bus roll out and them get on the plane, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moving company, you know, was offering them a special one-way move only at a discounted rate here, but some of them are saying they were only joking. Some of them are actually denying they ever said they were going to leave the country, and, of course, immediately the video clip of them saying they were going to leave the country goes viral on YouTube. And again, bit by bit, all they're doing is destroying their own credibility with all this hype and spin and propaganda, and they don't seem to understand that it's now an obsolete way of communicating with the public.
It gets so bad, though. It's like, I know everyone has the right to their own opinion, even if you don't agree with our well, I don't want to say our side, you know, the conservative, or whatever, how you want to call it, the non-globalist viewpoint, which is what I represent.
Yes.
But some of them get so bad with it, like when Robert De Niro got on there calling Trump a punk, and he wants to punch him in the face. I mean, that's just way out of bounds, man. I mean, that's just crazy.
It really is. And you know something? That all these people are basically revealing their own ego problems. Because effectively what they were saying is, if Trump wins, I am going to deny you, the public, the blessings of my talent and good looks and humor. And, of course, the reaction of the public was, okay, we can live without you. And
I wish... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I wish a billionaire would step forward and start their own movie production company and call it Movie Land, because Hollywood is so full of so many nut jobs like that. I forget the the actress that was up there, not Madonna. Well, that's within it. That's a story within itself, talking about blowing the White House up. Good Lord! But a lot of that actresses that they start a bunch of trouble instead of uniting us as a country now. You know, Hollywood, it seems like it's just full of crazy people. So I wish a billionaire would step forward and say, hey, you know what, we can make our own movies, we'll call it Movie Land. You know, the heck,
it's already happening.
Enough of that.
No, it's already happening. Hollywood is no longer the global center of movie making. There are wonderful movies being made in New Zealand, the Lord of the Rings films, Europe. They're all coming on. Hollywood is the place to be if being in Hollywood is what you want out of your life. But if you want to make quality movies and TV shows, there's a lot of production all over Europe. India has a huge film industry, and they're cranking out really good things. You know, like Vikings, Game of Thrones, and all those shows. Those are not being made in the United States, and you know, they basically destroyed themselves. We got to take a break for commercials. And we'll be right back with another phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're going to take another phone call. Matt in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. Obviously, Donald Trump is on my mind. I wanted to say I wasn't a voter of his, but nonetheless, I'm very happy with a lot of the things that he has done initially, so I'll make this quick, but 3 points specifically. The executive order to remove the United States from the TPP. Mm-hmm. I think that was wonderful and awesome. Second thing is the Women's March. I didn't even know about that until like 2 days before it happened. And I started looking it up, and I was wondering, wow, what are the women marching for? Because last I heard, women's rights had not been negatively impacted in the last 60 days or 90 days, and it seemed like an anti-Trump protest. And in fact, I think it was planned previously with the expectation that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and it was going to be a women's march, but then it became an anti-Trump march. And then that leads me to just briefly this other point, and this is an article that I find extremely slanderous and fake news coming out of the HuffPost today that says, Donald Trump signs anti-abortion executive order surrounded by men. Now, this is in reference, and I'm just going to quote this really
Not
quick.
very subtle, are they?
No, they're not subtle. They're actually blatantly insinuating false accusations. So, I mean, this is to reinstate the Mexico policy. It prohibits giving U.S. funding to international non-governmental organizations that offer advice on a wide range of family planning and reproductive health options if they include abortion, even if U.S. dollars are not specifically used for abortion-related services. Okay, great. Now, he said he's running on a platform of putting America first. And he didn't say we're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. He said we're not going to give a bunch of money to non-governmental organizations to go around and teach people how to deal with their own sexual behavior and their own reproductive activity. So that's just part of this women's movement and this women's march. And the thing about it, which is insidious, because as a white male, I feel that it just says Trump's cabinet is more white and more male than any president's first cabinet since Reagan. So you're getting demonized for being a white male. And to me, that's just nonsense, because I'm a complete feminist and I believe in all human rights and the freedom of choice.
Okay, well, let me stop you here, because, you know, again, the way Hillary was campaigning was to create all these imaginary monsters, of which the worst is the straight white male, and go on out and convince everybody that they're being oppressed or threatened or endangered by the straight white males, and then solicit votes and money so that Hillary would protect these voters from this imaginary threat. That's basically what it is. And every demagogue likes to have a scapegoat group on which to blame things. And for Hillary, that was the straight white male, to the point where we actually have academics openly saying, you know, a genocide of the white males would probably be a really good thing. And you have to sit back at that and say, you know, change the target group, and it sounds like we've got a bunch of Nazis running around.
Yeah, and not to belabor this point, but I talked to one of my friends who's a female, and her parents were professors at Harvard, and she's extremely educated, but she told me, and we got in an argument about it, that people of color cannot be racist. And she started going into a definition regarding prejudice versus racism and social inequality and blah, blah, blah. Not to belabor that point, I wanted to move on to this other thing. And this
well, no, I want to respond to that. I want to respond to that, because that's been one of the big propaganda issues of the last couple of years. This idea that only white people can be racist, and that anything that blacks do to whites is empowerment. And believe it or not, they did exactly the same thing with the feminist movement back in the 1990s, where only males could be sexist, and any time a woman was underhanded toward males, that was empowerment. Even in the application of a false accusation of rape, women were encouraged to do that. And it wasn't seen as lying or harmful. It was seen as empowerment. And it's part of this way of keeping Americans divided against each other, and the liberals are really very, very good at it.
I couldn't agree with you more than 100%. And then the last thing is that I own a solar company, and I'm not promoting myself, but I believe in renewable energies. And on Hawaii, I know that that's obviously an issue that you guys deal with. And given the fact that the Dakota pipeline has been in the headlines, and Trump signed in the XL pipeline and the Dakota pipeline.
Yeah, the Keystone.
He said that the Keystone, yeah. But there was like a couple of caveats that I think were overlooked by the press that are extremely significant. He said we're going to renegotiate them, and he said they're going to be made with American pipelines. And so if you just take that into consideration, you never hear anyone complaining who drives a car or wants to heat their home about low energy prices. They want low energy prices. The price of gasoline right now is incredibly low. And, if we have American pipelines bringing back American jobs and we're reducing the cost, and we can compensate people like for the Native American tribes whose land is being utilized in order for the transition, and we can ensure through various
okay, well, let me cut you off here because this idea of using American pipes goes beyond the creation of American jobs. The reason so many people are upset with these oil pipelines is the oil companies are building them as cheaply as possible, and they are not safe. In fact, they had another massive oil spill on Aboriginal land up in Canada, something like 200,000 barrels. And that's a valid concern when you look at how often these things fail. Now, I think if they can demonstrate that they can make a pipeline that is safe, will not leak, will not fail, that probably the opposition to these pipelines is going to go away once they're demonstrated to be absolutely safe. And so you're absolutely right. The corporate media skipped over the qualifiers on Donald Trump's memorandum on the Dakota Access Pipeline, because he's out there saying, yeah, there's a place to meet in the middle, in terms of safety and assuaging the concerns of the Native Americans who live on that land, and also everybody downstream who's concerned about the safety of their water. There is a place in the middle there. Now, the reality is that Keystone XL pipeline is probably going to increase gas prices, because the reason gas prices are so low, there is a glut of gas in the United States because so few people actually have to drive to work right now, and the Keystone can be used to sell that surplus up to Canada, and that will basically raise gas prices here somewhere between 10 and 20 cents a gallon is what's expected. Okay?
Interesting, yeah. I wasn't aware of that. Gosh. And the last thing I just want to say is that, for all of everything that's going on with Trump and so forth, I'm not for political correctness. I'm very considerate of other people and do not mean to offend people, but I think everyone is being overly sensitive, and it's getting out of control. And I personally have a problem with the acronym LGBTQIA, and I've looked them all up and tried to define them, and I don't have any problem with anybody's sexual orientation or gender identification, but I think this
well, political. Let me cut you off here because we got to get back to the news here. The political correctness movement was all about tricking people into surrendering their right to freedom of speech by saying you can only use these words, these phrases, these ideas to be politically correct. And if you go back and remember George Orwell's 1984, one of the characters in there is in charge of developing the Newspeak language. And the theory behind Newspeak was if you didn't have a word for a bad idea, then you couldn't have the bad idea. And so political correctness was all about sort of a cultural Marxism to get everybody to go along this very narrow, predefined path and to silence ourselves out of concern that somebody somewhere on planet Earth was offended by what we say. But you cannot have freedom of speech and freedom from offense at the same time, because especially when you speak truth to power, and you point out where a lot of these corrupting influences are coming from, people who are supportive of that platform are going to be offended. And, of course, nothing really happens when you're offended. You know, if I say something that offends you, okay, be offended. You have a right to be offended. And I'm not going to take that away from you. But you're not going to take away my right to basically express what I think is going on in the clearest terms possible. Anyway, Matt, we're going to let you go here. We're going to close the phone lines because we actually got complaints that we're doing too many phone calls and not enough news here. Speaking of the news, CNN came out with this wonderful little web page, a gigapixel image of the crowd at Washington, D.C. at the moment Donald Trump is doing his inaugural speech. And you can go in and zoom into it and see all the faces. For some reason, it doesn't work on the Chrome browser, but it will work on Firefox and Internet Explorer. And by doing this, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous image. And CNN actually succeeded in debunking its own claim that the audience at Trump's inauguration was small. Remember, they were putting that picture around from Reuters that showed hardly anybody in the mall. Reuters is still insisting they took it at the moment Trump was being sworn in. But if you look up on the actual dais, it's also empty. Nobody was there yet. And so if you look at this image, you will see that in point of fact, the corporate media has been caught lying yet again about the size of the attendance at Trump's inaugural. And Trump called them out on it, and the corporate media said, "How dare you question us? We're the corporate media." And the corporate media right now needs a good dose of humble, and probably nothing demonstrates that more than CNN President Jeff Zucker, who literally came on out and said that if the White House does not end their adversarial relationship with CNN, that CNN could incite a conflict with the Middle East and China. And of course, this triggered all kinds of complaints by citizens. The FBI is saying, yeah, they're aware that essentially CNN President Jeff Zucker is threatening to incite terror against President Trump. But Zucker is out there saying Donald Trump's image around the world is controlled by CNN. Not anymore, it isn't. I think Trump would be fully justified in bringing antitrust actions against CNN. Meanwhile, Kellyanne Conway is describing reporters who mock Trump as professional political hacks, and she's absolutely right. That's what they're doing. They're not reporting on the news and facts. They're going on out with the gotchas and the digs. They're trying to be opinion columnists, and that's not what they're being paid to do. And it's part of this corporate media war against Donald Trump and the White House. And it has gotten so intense, Kellyanne Conway is now being protected by the Secret Service because she's now getting death threats for standing up to the corporate media. Now, article over at the Daily Bell. Negative Trump coverage is long-term threat to his presidency. Yeah, that's true. And the issue is, can Donald Trump and the corporate media continue as they are right now, and for how long? When push comes to shove, I think Donald Trump, within the letter of the law, will take action against the corporate media. Over at State of the Nation, there's an article saying that the corporate media must be shut down because it is not going to change. And I think that CNN gigapixel image of Trump's inauguration, making it clear that they were lying about the attendance at the inauguration, proves the corporate media cannot change and will not change. They're trapped by their business model. They are paid huge sums of money to be convincing liars. They can't start reporting the truth, or their financial backers will let them go. Now, over at the New York Slimes, they're being accused of playing with history. This is coming out of Consortium News. And basically saying the New York Times was at the forefront of all the fake news we have been seeing for decades. Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, Assad's sarin gas, human-caused global warming, Hillary Clinton will win in a landslide. I can't imagine why anybody still subscribes to that paper. Probably for the discount coupons in the advertising section. Story coming out of RINF.com, the ongoing war against Trump. And it's not just against Trump. The corporate media is at war with the independent media. They're feeling their grip on the minds of America slip, and they're panicking. Now, this article at RINF is saying at this point it appears the corporate media is trying to sell the general population that Trump is illegitimate and to try and propagandize the American people into accepting the installation of a new ruler. In other words, this appears to be part of that attempt at a Maidan or a color revolution. But again, I think it's doomed to fail, because the public image that these disruptors are putting on out is not one that is going to win popular support. And looking back over the history since World War II, the U.S. only succeeds half the time when they try one of these overthrows. The last big one, Ukraine. Back in 2009, the attempt to have a color revolution in Iran absolutely cratered. And I think it will here as well, at which point I think certain traitors to the United States and the American way of life need to be arrested. Now, the other day we were talking about this so-called comedy writer, Katie Rich. And we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about Katie Rich. She's a writer for NBC. I think and apparently she tweeted out a tweet basically saying that Barron Trump, Donald's 10-year-old son, who may also be dealing with an impairment, she described him as the first homeschool shooter. And everybody responded angrily, and they should, for two reasons. First of all, you don't go after the families. Even the mafia holds to that rule. Second, you have these liberals who say they're all inclusive and they care about everybody, and you're dealing with a child who appears to be dealing with an impairment, and you go after him. That's clearly over the line. That's clearly over the line. And one of the problems that we seem to have is with this liberal culture is the idea that the rules should not apply to them, because after all, they never did to Hillary, right? So we're just going to go ahead and say what we want to say, and it's okay for us to be insulting, but not okay for you to be insulting. It's okay for us to be discriminatory because we can't be discriminatory. Only white people can be racist. You can see how it's nothing but double standards and hypocrisy. Now, speaking of Twitter, British researchers were running a study on how people interact with Twitter and stumbled across these gigantic networks of fake Twitter accounts. One of these networks had 350,000 totally fake Twitter accounts, and they think there are bigger ones out there. And these accounts were used to fake follower numbers, send spam, and boost interest in trending topics. In other words, Twitter got hijacked for propaganda purposes. And we documented that many, many times, where we would see the same word-for-word identical tweet being posted under all these different names. And inevitably, the little photo icon was a really cute girl, so you just wanted to click it and see it, or a really cute guy, depending upon which way you go. And it was the same tweet over and over and over and over again, whether it's global warming, Donald Trump supporting Hillary. It's amazing here. Okay, now then, Out in California, La La Land, apparently Governor Jerry Brown is saying that he's going to fight Donald Trump on global warming and immigration. So I'm going to set up the boxing ring here and sell tickets for that one. My nickel is bet on the Don on this one. But apparently they're looking at a bill that would mandate all schools in California to teach kids that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as I was mentioning before we went to station identification, out in California, there is a bill being introduced that would order all the public schools in California to teach kids that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. They might as well have a bill ordering the schools to teach kids that dinosaurs are still alive or that the earth is flat. There is no proof that Russia interfered in the 2016 elections. This is a bill that is ordering the schools to lie to our children, to brainwash them. Now then, we are looking at the issues with Hillary Clinton. A lot of people speculating why Barack Obama did not offer her a pardon. Maybe he didn't want that stain on his legacy, or maybe it was just personal animosity, which was on display the last few weeks of Obama's term in office. He was just letting his ego have free rein with a lot of the decisions he made. And it's no secret that Obama was very angry with Hillary Clinton over all the scandals she brought to his administration. Now, Trump can stand up there and say he's not out for revenge. But Trump and the Department of Justice and the FBI are not the only threats to Hillary Clinton. There is still Judicial Watch. And Judicial Watch has filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit seeking records that were stored on the equipment of Datto Incorporated, which was a commercial data management company tasked with backups and off-site storage of Hillary Clinton's emails from her private server. And there is really no reason for that to be refused. They can't say it's classified if it was being stored on a public server. So I think Judicial Watch is just working bit by bit to build up the case against Hillary Clinton. And they're going to make it rock solid because they've already had a taste of the Clintons' influence. Down in Florida, the founder of Judicial Watch, Larry Klayman, had actually filed a RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation. And it had the misfortune of being assigned, supposedly at random, to a Clinton-appointed judge who just threw it out without even looking at it. But sooner or later, there's going to be something that can't be buried, can't be covered up, is beyond the ability of bribes. We're hearing now that there is a 50-50 chance Hillary Clinton will run for mayor of New York City. They are not retiring. They're trying to find a way to make a comeback. If Donald Trump does not allow the FBI and the Department of Justice to investigate Hillary Clinton, he may well be facing her again in 2020. And of course, along with that, we need to seriously overhaul our election system. We talked about that yesterday. And I got more emails from listeners in other countries saying, yeah, we got rid of those electronic machines long ago. And we have an election system very similar to what you described. One person wrote on in saying that dipping the finger in the dye might have a hygiene issue, so be a little airbrush or something. So people don't have to worry so much about germs, as it were. Now, according to Gallup, President Obama's overall average approval rating, for his 8 years in office was lower than that of Richard Nixon and George W. Bush. Now, Obama can take solace in the fact that he was slightly ahead of Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Harry Truman. Now, over at the DNC, they're starting to go through the motions of appointing a new chairman of the DNC, a permanent one. And so all the candidates for the chair are up there talking, and they're bashing white people. They're bemoaning their losses this last election, and they're scapegoating white people. And the executive director of Idaho's Democratic Party, Sally Boynton Brown, said that Democrats have to provide training that focuses in part on teaching Americans how to be sensitive and how to shut their mouths if they are white. If you're white, just shut up. You don't know anything about the life here. Now, Sally Boynton Brown herself is also white. So here we have this white Democrat screaming that whites should just shut up. And she will not take her own advice. We're going to take a second to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And what's amazing as you see all these Democrats running around in circles trying to figure out what the heck happened this last year. They will not actually honestly deal with the reality. They ran a candidate with a criminal past that nobody could trust, nobody could like, and they failed to connect with the voters, even with all the massive election fraud. But they won't deal with that. They won't acknowledge that. Oh, it's the fault of the white people. It's the fault of the independent media. It's Russia. It's just constant scapegoating. Now, as I mentioned before, the Democrats are already putting together their list of who's going to run against Donald Trump in 2020. And Hillary is on that list. Michelle Obama, who's never actually held an office before in her life. Joe Biden, even Tim Kaine. The top of the list, though, is Elizabeth Warren, who's seen as the ultra-progressive senator. But, unfortunately, her poll numbers are now turning down. I think last year's election and the ability to actually force the choice of the people through all the election fraud has sparked a lot of desire for states to maybe get rid of some of their deadwood. And the polls up in Massachusetts, she's probably going to lose her Senate seat in 2018, which means she would not be ideally suited to be a candidate in 2020. But I hope somebody from Trump's organization is listening to this broadcast, because it's clear the Clintons are not going to go into retirement. Hillary's talking about mayor of New York City. The Democrats are talking about running her again in 2020. And so two things need to happen. Hillary Clinton needs to be prosecuted for her crimes, and we need to deal with the election fraud issue decisively. Now, in terms of international relations, Trump has basically announced he wants to team up with Vladimir Putin to fight ISIS all over the Mideast, all over the globe. Going to clean up that mess that he inherited from his predecessor. Meanwhile, over in Europe, they're in a panic at this idea that the United States might actually start pulling their troops and weapons out of there. And a senior defense general based in Europe says that if Trump pulls the troops from Europe, Russia will invade. They'll invade immediately if the American troops go home. I'll tell you what's actually going on. Right now, Europe is enjoying all those American troops on their soil with pockets full of U.S. taxpayer dollars being poured into Europe's economy. Because when they're not out there on the front lines, these U.S. troops, they're being tourists, they're traveling around, they're shopping, they're eating at the restaurants. Having them there is good for the European economy. It's bad for the American economy, but it's good for Europe. That's the real danger if Trump pulls the troops from the continent. Russia's not going to invade. Why would Russia invade Europe? He's got enough problems of his own. Europe is on the verge of a massive economic collapse. It's dealing with this refugee crisis. Why would Putin want to invade? There's nothing there for him that he needs. Remember a couple of months ago, early last year, the corporate media was out there saying that Vladimir Putin wanted to steal Alaska back. And Putin himself laughed it off and said, we've got enough frozen wilderness already in Siberia. Why would we want Alaska? To which I would add the footnote, Sarah Palin's there. Nobody wants that. Meanwhile, in Great Britain, their corporate media is still ramping up war rhetoric against Russia. Let's see, the Telegraph on the last day of last year, systemic, relentless, predatory Russian cyber threat to U.S. power grid, blah, blah, blah. The Independent, middle of December, highly probable Russia interfered with Brexit. The Express, just a few days ago, Russians forcing RAF to abort missions in Syria by hacking into their systems. The Guardian, also just a week ago, senior British politicians targeted by Kremlin for smear campaigns. In every one of these reports, there's not a single scrap of actual evidence. It's all rumor and hearsay. And by the way, as far as Russians forcing the RAF to abort their missions in Syria, the RAF does not have the permission of Syria's government to be there. The corporate media is out there trying to assume the position that they will tell us who our enemies are and who our friends are. And I have a message to the corporate media. We're all big boys and girls out here. We can figure it out for ourselves, who our enemies are and who our friends are. We can figure out for ourselves what's real news and what's fake news, which is why you're all in a lather. Now, as you know, a lot of these NATO forces are piled up on the Polish border with Russia and Belarus. That may not go out so well because apparently back in 2008, Poland started shifting to a pro-Russia policy, and they just declassified a 2008 policy document in which the decision was made to improve relations with Russia and start pulling away from Europe. Now, over in China, Xi Jinping is taking the position that all nuclear weapons all over the world should be completely prohibited. Obviously, he's thinking about all the saber-rattling and propaganda coming out of North Korea, but it's a good idea. I'd like to see a world in which we don't have these city-destroying weapons hanging over our head like the sword of Damocles. But there's a problem. You can pass a UN resolution that prohibits nuclear weapons, and Israel will ignore it. They'll go back to saying, we don't have any nuclear weapons. Really? And anybody who says we do is just being a dirty, filthy anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the oven. That compliance is a big issue, especially when it comes to Israel. Now, David Icke is out with a new article saying that we are beginning to see more and more people willing to talk about the actions of Israel's government. And Israel has, for decades, been able to suppress criticism by screaming anti-Semite, Jew hate, racist, and so forth and so on. But very clearly, that power is waning today. As more and more people understand, the criticism is not directed against Jewish people. It's not directed against any religion or ethnic group. It is a criticism of the actions of a powerful few in a government. And no government is above the law or above criticism. And people are beginning to understand that. On top of which, of course, Israel's defenders have hurled anti-Semite in so many directions, they've worn it out. It's lost its shock value. 20, 30 years ago, somebody said, you're an anti-Semite. Oh, I have to work to correct that. Today, somebody says you're an anti-Semite, you go, okay. Big deal. It just doesn't matter any longer. Now, apparently over at Fordham University, there was a group of students wanted to form a student group to support Palestinian rights. The process for approval of the application, which normally would have taken weeks, dragged on for 13 months. The student government eventually approved the student group in support of Palestinian rights, but the dean of students, Keith Eldridge, used a very rarely used veto power to ban the group from campus. So we are still seeing that effort to hijack education in service to a foreign government. Now, Bernie Sanders is out there applauding Donald Trump's withdrawing of the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and with the U.S. stepping out. They were pushing for it. TPP is now dead. Everybody's going to tear up the paperwork, toss it in the shredder, and say, thank goodness we missed that one. We dodged a bullet on that one. And so a lot of people are very happy about that. Some importing companies that prefer to have jobs outside the country are out there whining and saying, oh, everything that you buy from us is now going to be much more expensive now that TPP is dead. But I think most Americans are going to be willing to pay a little bit more for what they buy in exchange for two things: better quality and jobs for fellow Americans. Claire and I, when we go down to buy something, we look for stuff that's made in the United States. And yes, it'll be more expensive. And yes, we're willing to spend that money because we understand one of the reasons our nation is in such a fragile economic situation was this rush to offshore jobs by a corporate culture that seemed to have forgotten your employees, collectively, are also your customers, collectively. If you take away their jobs, they are not going to show up at the malls and buy things. And by the way, the owners of shopping malls are now starting to get out. They're seeing retail as failing because people don't have money. They're blaming online shopping, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But basically, we're seeing this article over in Government Slaves where retailers are saying that U.S. brick and mortar retail footprints have to be reduced by 1 billion square feet all across the country. They've got to move to smaller and smaller spaces. Now, yes, a lot of people buy things online, but it's not our first choice. It's certainly not my first choice. I prefer going down to a store, walk on in, see what I want to buy, pay for it, and go home. Instant gratification is the heart of the retail experience. Unfortunately, retailers have gotten out of the habit of having a selection, and they'll load up their store with thousands and thousands of whatever they could get the cheapest. And their attitude is, you'll buy what we're selling you or you'll do without. And people are saying, we're going to do without. We'll order online to find what we can't get at the stores. And that's a big reason why retail is in trouble. Not just the economic downturn, but a very arrogant attitude coming out of these retail companies that will decide what we want to sell you, and we don't care what it is you want to buy. And we go back and forth on this very issue with our local supermarket. They'll have a product we really like, and all of a sudden it's off the shelf, and there's something on the shelf that's nowhere near as good for more money. And we'll talk to the store manager saying, can't you get this other thing back? And he says, it's not up to me. Corporate sends me what I'm supposed to sell to you. Now, over in Spain, their court has jailed 5 former executives, bank executives, who got millions in severance pay from a struggling bank that later had to be nationalized. We need some of that here. We need to put the crooked Wall Street financial sharks, criminals, into prison. We need to disincentivize financial fraud. More about that when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as you know, Rolls-Royce got into their own trouble because they had this 24-year period in which Rolls-Royce executives were secretly paying off middlemen and officials in 11 developing countries to win lucrative business. Bribing is basically what they were doing. And last week, Rolls-Royce agreed to pay £671 million in total to British, U.S., and Brazilian authorities to settle the allegations of bribery, which occurred in countries including Russia, Iraq, and China. So now attention is turning to the accounting firm, KPMG, which was supposed to be the auditor for Rolls-Royce to keep their bookkeeping honest. And obviously they had to know the bribery was going on and find some way to cover it up. And the problem with all of these is that every time a company gets fined, it comes off their taxes in part. They raise prices to their customers and clients, and nobody goes to jail. Now, the newly elected leader of Moldova is visiting Moscow on his first official visit as president of Moldova, and he's just come right out and said, I don't think we're ever going to join the European Union, and Brussels hopefully understands this. I imagine Brussels might think that that European Union army they've been talking about could be used to invade a country here or there and say, really, you're going to be much better off in the European Union. Before you do that, however, I would remind you what an absolute disaster Ukraine turned into, because that was all about bringing them into the European Union. And the democratically elected president of Ukraine was saying, Russia's offering us a better deal. Our people are historically, traditionally Russian, and we're going to go cozy up to Russia. And it's at that point that all of these NGOs and snipers and everything went on into Kiev to drive the legitimate government out of power and replace it with Poroshenko, who immediately turned around and said, oh yes, we're going to merge with the European Union. Absolutely. Now, over in Germany, they're going to have their next election in September. Merkel is running for another term as chancellor. Her poll numbers are not looking good at all. And so apparently she has decided to copy a page from Hillary's playbook and blame it all on Russia. Russia is spreading disinformation about Angela Merkel. It's all Russia's fault. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the German people's rejection of Merkel's open borders policy. But it's like blaming Russia for everything is the new fashion trend among the political elite. No matter what happens, Russia did it. Russia's to blame. Now, there's an interesting little article that came out from Sputnik News. The German government has a problem with critically minded citizens. Well, that's hardly unique to Germany. All governments have a problem with critically minded citizens who are watching what they're doing and analyzing what they see. But apparently, according to this story, following the meeting of leaders in the European Parliament's faction, Europe and Freedom Nations, journalists were told that the German government can't deal with people who have opinions outside that which is being dictated to them. And apparently in Germany now, people whose opinion differs from that of the establishment are immediately labeled as anti-democratic. That's the new word. If you are not blindly following along with the flock, you are now anti-democratic. So I guess Democrats are now seen as sheep in Germany as well as here in the United States of America. Now, the Dutch polls are showing Geert Wilders really starting to soar. He's got a 9-point lead. More about this when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So we're talking about the polls for Geert Wilders' Populist Party leading up to the Dutch elections. And Geert Wilder's party has been against this refugee open border policy. And now he's got a 9-point lead on the current ruling Conservatives. And as a result of this poll result, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte is now starting to change his policy and drift over to Geert Wilders, saying that these refugees have to integrate into Dutch society, and if they don't want to do that, they should leave. And he's also issued a call for a return to common decency. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But these politicians are starting to realize that this open borders idea has not worked out, and it is now an election loser. Meanwhile, over in Tijuana, Mexican protesters have seized control of the U.S. border crossing as part of these riots over gasoline price hikes. Now, they've only seized the Mexican side of the border crossing, but apparently there were enough of them there where the Mexican authorities just ran, and the protesters were just waving motorists into Mexico, come on in, buy some fireworks. Now, Donald Trump's pick to head the FCC wants to abolish net neutrality. And a lot of people are saying, oh, it'll be the end of independent media, and yeah, we're going to see some abuses by the corporations that run the net. And we're already seeing some game playing already with certain websites all of a sudden disappearing from the DNS. But actually what this FCC head is saying is the federal government will not be regulating the Internet. And that actually is going to be a good thing when you remember that it wasn't all that long ago. FCC member Ajit Pai was out there saying federal regulators were going to seek to regulate websites based on their political content, using the power of the FCC or the Federal Elections Commission. And so this pulling of the federal government out of the Internet looks to have more upside than downside. Now, if you are a computer hardware geek, and aren't we all, really, you're already familiar with the Raspberry Pi. And it's this little tiny computer on a board, and it's got a lot of capability, and it's for people who just want to play around with the hardware, cook up their own interfaces, make a telescope controller out of it or something like that. Asus has entered this area of the market with what's called the Tinker board. And they've come on out. It goes for about $70, and it's got a quad-core rock chip processor. It supports 4K video, and apparently it's a lot faster than the Pi version 3, and it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun for anybody who's into robotics or just wants to hack the hardware directly. Now, as I understand it, these computer on boards come with an embedded operating system and embedded interpreter. So you just plug in the terminal and the keyboard and the display rather and the keyboard, and you can actually program this thing to do all kinds of fascinating stuff. And like I said, it looks to me like it would make a hip controller for a computer-operated telescope, for all you astronomy buffs out there. Now then, let's talk about human-caused global warming. Al Gore is out with his new sequel to Inconvenient Truth. And I love the irony that when it opened at the Sundance Film Festival, they had heavy snow and freezing weather. And Gore is already out there trying to use this film to sort of rewrite the history of the first film. Because in that first film, Al Gore predicted that by this time, the melting of the ice caps would flood Manhattan, including the site of the 9/11 memorial. And what he's done in this film is a little bit dishonest, because Gore took clips from Superstorm Sandy which did flood water into lower Manhattan, including the memorial site, and say this is proof that his prediction was coming true. Well, Superstorm Sandy is not caused by the melting of the ice caps. There hasn't been any melting of the ice caps. Quite the contrary, we are headed into another major winter. I'm getting emails from people all over saying they're snowed in, they're having to deal with very heavy snow. Out in Reno, Nevada, the snowplow drivers are working 12-hour shifts trying to keep the roads cleared over there. New Zealand is reeling from what is being called a weather bomb because they are being repeatedly hit with snowstorms down there, and it's the middle of their summer below the equator. Over in Japan, parts of that nation are dealing with a steady falling of snow. And the pictures were rather amazing to look at. So all this talk about snowfalls are a thing of the past was nonsense. Humans are warming the Earth. Even NASA is finally grudgingly saying that, yes, solar output is what's really setting the temperature here on Earth, and solar output is in decline. And once again, the corporate media stands fully exposed for feeding you a line of USDA choice bovine excrement for monetary and political gain. How many more times do you have to be lied to until you stand up and say, I am sick and tired of being lied to, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore? That time is here and now. It's not politically correct to pretend to believe what's on CNN or MSNBC. We evolved to have a brain. I would respectfully request everybody start using it. Because nothing terrorizes tyrants more than people who think for themselves, figure things out, and ask important questions. Now, as that caller mentioned earlier in the show, Trump has signed an executive order moving forward on the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. As that caller mentioned, there were caveats on it involving renegotiation, involving how the pipelines were going to be constructed to hopefully make them a little bit safer. But contrary to the caller who called on in, the Keystone Pipeline is actually going to increase gas prices in the U.S. because the oil and gas glut that has built up here in the United States, because people aren't driving as much, they don't have jobs to go to, that's what's driving these prices down. And if that pipeline can be used to sell the surplus of Gulf oil to Canada, the glut goes away and the prices go up, estimated 10 to 20 cents a gallon. Now then, let's talk about the 7 most egregious acts of social justice in Obama's military. We saw all this kind of nonsense. Remember when they had these cadets, male cadets, walking around in high heels to sensitize them to the trauma of what it's like to be a woman in America. And by the way, there is no law that says a woman has to wear high heels. And they are, in fact, bad for your feet. So, let's see. Apparently, back in 2012, a proposed U.S. Army handbook ordered soldiers not to make any negative comments about pedophilia, which apparently is a common practice in Afghanistan. And let's see. 2014, the Army punished Chaplain Joseph Lawhorn for listing Bible verses as an optional resource in a suicide prevention training class. They got a major problem with suicide. And he was ordered not to do that because the Bible disrespects diversity. Apparently, an Air Force base banned the greeting, "Have a blessed day." And here's the one about the Army ROTC cadets walk around in bright red heels for social justice. Apparently, a DOD-approved training course listed the Declaration of Independence as a document that perpetuates sexism. And there's a lot more of this nonsense. But do they really expect they're going to go up against Russia and China when our military are being indoctrinated for these kinds of issues instead of learning how to actually shoot a gun? It really is rather ridiculous. Now then, you've been probably seeing a lot of ads on TV about the shingles vaccine. If you had mumps, you're carrying the shingles virus in your body, and it can leap up on you and cause all kinds of problems. I had an uncle who had shingles. It really is very, very painful. And if you've had the mumps, you have a 1 in 3 chance of getting shingles during your lifetime, and they're selling a vaccine for it. It turns out that the people who are vaccinated with this shingles vaccine are turned into carriers and can infect other people with this virus. And we have been seeing this over and over again, where all of a sudden there's a screaming about a measles or a mumps outbreak, and they say, why, oh, why did these people not get vaccinated? And then you find out they did. These vaccinations are not protecting people from illness, they're causing it. We were talking the other day about how the AMA is very concerned about how people who are being given the oral polio virus are coming down with a strange paralytic disease. And when it first appeared, people said, it looks like polio. And the AMA said, no, 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 no. You don't dare call it polio. We'll take away your medical license. You call it something else. You call it a shrunk or a fisbin or, you know, unspecified polio-like paralysis if you want to do that. There's really a grand cover-up going on over how bad medicines and treatments in this country have become. Now, there's a new study, this is being reported in InvestmentWatchBlog.com, a new study that confirms once again children are being overdiagnosed and overtreated for ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And remember, the guy who came up with that, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, shortly before he passed away, said, it's the perfect example of a fictitious disease. It was created to sell medications. It doesn't really exist. When I was a kid, we didn't have ADHD. We had teacher is boring the heck out of me. So, of course, I'm going to look out the window. Now, here is a very, very sick story. This is down in Florida. And it has to do with a police officer. And apparently this police officer had been friends with this elderly woman and had unfortunately been stealing checks from the victim's house and writing them to himself and his children to the tune of $65,000. And apparently the deputy, when the woman went into the hospital, the deputy said he was going to take care of the dog. Instead, tried to sell the dog on Craigslist and say it ran away. Well, apparently the elderly woman wised up and filed a police report, at which point this police officer broke into her home, grabbed her, and forced a bunch of pills down her mouth along with her prescription tranquilizer that was used to induce sleep, and she lost consciousness. When she woke up, she found there was a hose running from her car with the engine running, filling the house with carbon monoxide. This is a law enforcement, officer who's done this. And this gets back to something I have said many times before. The lust for these pieces of paper and ink have destroyed what was best about Americans. We used to be a people that took pride in our work just because we wanted to do good work. We were altruistic to our friends and neighbors. We had a sense of community. We had a sense of pride about ourselves and our nation. And all of that is eroding away under this constant drumbeat of you need more money to give to the bankers. You need more money to give to the bankers. And it is a loss. America, its soul, is being hammered out of existence by the greed of the money junkies. Okay, apparently, let's see what's going on here. Investigators over in Massachusetts were investigating a Brazilian man, found $20 million stashed inside a mattress. That's interesting there. The auto lease Ponzi is getting ready to fall apart. Used car prices are now plunging. And that's certainly true. We're looking for a new car here, and we've been offered a 1990 Bronco in pretty decent shape for only $500. So we're going to be looking at that here. The British Army, I guess with all the talk about attacking Russia, is failing to attract new recruits. Nobody's going to sign up for the Army if they think they're going to be sent to be killed and crippled in a pointless war. They're missing their manpower target by thousands. How about grabbing some of those illegal immigrants and refugees, put them in uniform here? Somebody just posted an article here about global warming. Back in 1987, global warming causes sea levels to fall. And now they're saying global warming causes a slowdown in sea level rise. They can't make up their mind. They're just saying whatever they think it's going to take to get you to believe them and go along with the agenda, which is carbon taxes, mandatory buying of carbon credits, and so forth and so on. And again, the corporate media is doing their job that they're paid to do. Lie to you. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Secret Service. Now, most people, when they hear the phrase Secret Service, they think about the President's protective detail, and that's actually only a very small area of what the Secret Service does. They have permanent presences in all the major cities, and along with security issues for American diplomats, they're also at the forefront of tracking down counterfeiters, except for the ones at the Federal Reserve. But there's apparently last October, a senior Secret Service agent, Carrie O'Grady, posted a Facebook post saying Trump is a disaster for the country and that she would rather go to jail than take a bullet for Donald Trump. I'm sure that now she's not going to have to worry about that. The reason this is interesting is because back in 2015, there was this incident out in Denver where an FBI sniper rifle was stolen out of a vehicle in the hotel parking lot just before Obama's visit to Utah. Now, this sniper rifle was secured in the car, chains, locks, a truck vault, and apparently whoever stole the rifle literally used a cable and another vehicle to just rip everything loose and take the rifle. And the acting special agent in charge for the Secret Service's Denver district, who was basically in charge of finding out whether or not that rifle was going to be used on the president, was, in fact, Carrie O'Grady. So there's kind of an interesting little juxtaposition going on there. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Brian in Phoenix, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. I'm concerned about Federal Reserve and about this, talk and, about auditing it. And I can't see how that would do any good. I just think we know it's a scam. I just think it needs to be eliminated. That's how Trump could really help the American people.
Yeah, he really could. But, of course, as history has shown, when you go up against those private central bankers and threaten their little scam, bad things can happen. And I'm sure Trump is already well aware of that. So I think what Trump could do is what Vladimir Putin did, which is to take direct government control of the central bank, but not take it away from its owners, because that's what Putin did. He went to Russia's private central bank. It's still privately owned. But he said, we're going to run this. Just take your earnings and go relax, go on a permanent vacation. We're going to run it and run the economy for the benefit of Russia. And by the way, that was the day that Putin and Russia went from being our friend and partner to the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. So I think that... Oh, we're going to have to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call, and we're going to try and connect with Wayne Madsen. And here we are, back on the air here.
One second. Here you go. Wayne is here.
Okay, Wayne. All right, good.
Yes. Hello.
Little bit of a delay here, but we're talking with Wayne Madsen, author, investigator, and I think this is the first time you and I have talked since the 10th anniversary 9/11 symposium that INN World Report put together all that way back. So thank you for spending time with us today, and I understand you have a new book out.
I do, and it started out as a conversation I was having with an old CIA hand who also happened to have worked for two of the large network news organizations, and we were talking, and the subject of a book compiling all the various CIA front companies, proprietaries, contractors, so forth and so on, came up, and so this conversation was back in April, and basically I spent all summer compiling all these CIA front companies and whatnot into a book, and it's called The Almost Classified Guide to CIA Front Companies, Proprietaries, and Contractors. Almost because it is probably borderline, it's the old synergistic effect. When you take things from multiple sources and put them into one place, I'm sure there's people at the CIA who would say, hey, that should be classified. So hence the title, Almost Classified.
Well, some of the CIA's proprietaries are actually quite out in the open. One that I'm aware of are the Foder's travel guides, which are actually excellent travel guides. And I imagine that's a great cover. You go on in to a country and saying, I'm with the CIA, and they lock things up and everything, but you go on in and say, I'm with the Foder's travel guides, and they say, oh, let me show you this, let me show you that, here's where we put that. And they're proud to basically show up because they think you're going to be good for their tourism industry. What are some of the other examples that you found of this?
Well, Foder's is actually in the book, and but it's really quite shocking when I realized in writing this that the CIA was dealing with the Hells Angels as sort of a partner in a partnership type situation. At the same time, it was dealing with the 4-H clubs and the Campfire Girls.
Yes.
Now, most people wouldn't put those organizations together, except the CIA was able to deal with those disparate groups. And one very interesting thing is the CIA really mastered the art of setting up these intertwined, interconnected front companies. Some of them folding 10 operations because they'd only be around for one operation, and then they would disappear with very little trace of them having existed, except they were required in many cases to register as corporations with the whatever state they were in, their business Secretary of State's office at registered businesses. But Walt Disney, before, as he was looking at opening up Disney World in Florida, basically had to deal with the CIA's biggest hand in setting up proprietary companies, a guy named Paul Hellawell, who was based out of southern Florida. Disney said, hey, listen, I don't want to go into the Orlando, Kissimmee area and start buying up massive amounts of property because it's going to people are going to realize what's going on, and the prices are going to go up. So Disney had Hellawell establish like a dozen of these front companies that went in and individually bought up little parcels of land, and it didn't tip off any of the local real estate agents. It looked like just somebody's coming in and buying some property, but not one entity, the Disney Corporation, was doing it as far as they were concerned. So essentially what happened is that these front companies then were able to individually buy up the property, which is now Walt Disney World.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that myself through my contacts with Disney. We're going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we're talking with Wayne Madsen, who's an investigative reporter, journalist, author, and we're talking about his new book, which is an in-depth examination in the world of CIA proprietary and front companies. A lot of people think of the CIA as James Bond spook stuff, but you'd be amazed how many businesses the CIA runs, both as covers for operation and even to make a few bucks on the side here. I keep thinking back to Terry Reid's book, Compromised Clinton, Bush, and the CIA, and he talks about the business advantages that come to anybody who's dealing with the CIA, those additional network contacts that result in certain advantages for people who are in business that their non-CIA connected competitors cannot enjoy.
Yeah, that's true. And so when you look at these CIA companies, you have different flavors, and some are sort of hybrids. Everybody's probably familiar with Air America because of the film. So this was an offshoot of the old Flying Tigers and Civil Air Transport. Claire Chennault, World War II, they were flying supplies for the Nationalist Chinese, even before Pearl Harbor. And what this developed into with the onset of the Cold War was Air America, which at one time was considered the largest airline in the world. And they had all kinds of subsidiaries in Southeast Asia and Taiwan and Okinawa and Japan. Now this was, these CIA airlines were all basically the courtesy of a guy named George Dooley, who was the CIA's top airline company manager. Nobody knew it at the time. He lived in an apartment on Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, D.C. He never told anybody what he really did, but he essentially was the guy in charge of all these airlines, from Air America, Southern Air Transport, many of them operationally based out of the Marana Airfield outside of Tucson, Arizona.
Evergreen Air?
Evergreen Air was one of them, and this was a massive worldwide operation. And but that's just so. What happened eventually? Southern Air spins off as a private company, and they're so we had them go from like a front operation into and proprietary and into a profit-making airline company. Apparently, some aspects of that firm are still active in Dayton, Ohio. It's just the amazing thing is how many businesses they were involved in. Now, there was one company called Aerometrics, which was a spin-off of Paramount Pictures.
Oh, okay.
And Aerometrics basically was involved in the CIA's imagery analysis operations from the spy satellites. So they were involved in like 3D imaging, something they probably picked up in Hollywood and then applied this as a spin-off for the CIA. These things I was not aware of until I started doing the research for this book.
Well, it's funny what you're talking about, picking this stuff up from Hollywood, because if you're in the computer animation field, there's an annual conference every year called SIGGRAPH, Special Interest Group Graphics. It's a subset of the Association for Computing Machinery. And I remember, this was back in the 1990s, was the first time students from the Soviet Union were allowed to come to the United States to attend SIGGRAPH. And so I stopped by their little booth, and they're showing what they're doing on their little tiny computers. And after I was there for a while, you know, this really shady-looking guy comes up to me, and he like says, "What did you get from them?" And I'm saying, "Well, Bressingham's algorithm." And he says, "Is that classified?" And I'm saying, "No, it's like Computer Graphics 101." And this guy was just acting like we were talking about nuclear weapons or something, and you know, it was kind of a ridiculous situation.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting to see the change the CIA over the years as U.S. industry changed. I mean, when you talk about post-World War II era, we're talking 40s and 50s, you see that the CIA partners are, you know, your big white shoe Wall Street companies.
Yes.
And many of these were used to provide cover, non-official commercial cover for CIA people operating abroad. So you get a lot of law firms, but you get an awful lot of advertising agencies.
Yes.
And you know, I mean, this is like, you know, people would think, well, advertising agency, yeah, because who would really link that to the CIA? It was really perfect cover, more so than say a bank, which there were a number of banks being used. Manufacturers, Hanover's was one of the big CIA front company banks or partnership banks used to provide cover for CIA agents.
And of course, they were all over Hollywood, every major studio and everything. In fact, I was actually approached about joining CIA when I was working at CBS Television City. And I was not really impressed with them, and I turned them down, at which point I lost my job at CBS Television City and had to go work for this hole-in-the-wall TV station in Orange, California. But I remember they took me up to this place called the Pacific Institute for Advanced Research in Hollywood, and it's just down the street from the Magic Castle. And they were very open about the fact that they were a CIA front, and what their purpose was to look for students in college who were working on something with potential intelligence military application, and they'd bring them into the Pacific Institute for Advanced Research, they'd fund them, they'd develop whatever, they'd print them up a really nice advanced degree, and everybody would go home happy. And but as far as I can tell, that was pretty much the hub of CIA within Hollywood itself.
Yeah, and that's before, of course, now the CIA and the Pentagon and the FBI all have liaison offices in Hollywood because of the, you know, the production of movies where they actually help as long as the whatever movie it is makes the CIA, FBI, NSA, Pentagon look good.
Yes.
I think the FBI was probably the first because J. Edgar Hoover had this real fascination and interest in making sure the FBI was only portrayed as a God-fearing apple pie motherhood type agency going after bad guys everywhere. And the word was that he actually would review the scripts of every movie that would even mention the FBI and also the TV series.
It went beyond that. It went beyond that. Do you remember the movie The FBI Story with Jimmy Stewart?
Oh, right, absolutely.
Hoover was actually on the set every day telling the director how to make that movie, and he actually appears in it as a cameo from the backside only. But, yeah, he was an absolute nut about Hollywood. He had this ongoing feud with Charlie Chaplin, because even before Hoover was head of the FBI, he was out there in Hollywood saying, you got to make movies that teach people to be obedient to authority. And, of course, Chaplin understood his audience paid to see movies where authority figures were made to look like oafish buffoons, and he wasn't going to change his business model. And Hoover actively worked to help bring about Chaplin losing his visa and getting him kicked out of the country, such that it took a special act of Congress to get Chaplin allowed back into the U.S. to pick up his Lifetime Achievement Award over at the Academy.
Yes, yes. And so the other thing we're talking about, you know, the CIA's involvement with entertainment. they were also involved with things that kids were fascinated with. For example, one of their partners was DC Comics out of New York, and what the CIA was involved with there was making sure that these characters, these comic characters, these superheroes, all went after the communists in many cases, and during the Balkans wars in the 90s, they even started to translate special comic books featuring Superman and Wonder Woman, and they're over there fighting the evil Serbians in the Balkans, and this was all translated into Albanian and Serbo-Croatian for the children, kids over there. It was a massive psychological warfare operation using Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman.
That's amazing, absolutely amazing. Where is your book available? Where can people get it?
Available at all the online places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. There's links for my website, WayneMadsonReport.com. So it's easily obtainable.
Okay. Well, unless you've got a few more choice samples of CIA proprietaries you want to share with us, I'm hoping you can stay as much of the remaining hour as possible.
Certainly.
I saw something else that had your name over it, involving apparently CIA blackmail of some of our own top politicians, and I was wondering if we could maybe get into that.
Certainly. Well, I mean, blackmail certainly works in many cases. I specifically was mentioning what the CIA had on three Republican senators, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Marco Rubio, and all three of these senators had initially indicated they were not going to support Rex Tillerson, the former ExxonMobil chief, to be Secretary of State. All of a sudden, one after another, like collapsing dominoes. First, it was McCain said, "I think I can support Tillerson," even though he criticized Tillerson. He said, "I can't support anyone who took an award from Vladimir Putin." And then the next, it was Lindsey Graham falls in line, says, "I'm not happy, but I'll support Tillerson." And lastly, Marco Rubio, who indicated he was not going to vote to confirm Tillerson, said he was going to. And what the dirt is, and of course Trump has his dirt as well on McCain. McCain has a very, very sordid background.
Yeah, we're going to have to take a break for commercials. Hold that thought. When we come on back, I want to hear all about McCain's sordid background. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Pardon me. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Wayne Madsen. We've been talking about his book about CIA front companies. And now we're stepping on over to his recent story about how the CIA is blackmailing some of our top officials. And if you go up high enough, everybody has dirt on them. And you were going to give us the sordid background of John McCain.
Yeah, I guess I should preface this. Back in 2000, I actually was working as a volunteer for the McCain presidential campaign because I thought that George W. Bush was, 100 times worse than McCain. And of course, back then, McCain was really considered the maverick, moderate Republican. But I got to know a lot of people close to John McCain, including members of his family. So, but when he ran again in 2008, he had really changed his spots. So I started talking to a lot of critics of John McCain. People had known him over the years, including crewmen on the USS Forrestal. This was a U.S. aircraft carrier that was in the Gulf of Tonkin during the Vietnam War. 1967, it suffered the worst fire in the history of the United States Navy. Scores of sailors were killed, and many more were injured, some permanently, when one of the guys on the flight deck who was in his jet, his nickname was Johnny Wet Start, and this was John McCain.
Yeah.
And Johnny Wet Start, he got that name because back then, as a form of hazing, and this is very dangerous to do on a flight deck with fuel and bombs and missiles. He did what was called a wet start. It's very similar to if you shake a lighter and then you light it, you get like a big expulsion of a flame. And he did the same thing, except when he did it, he cooked off a air-to-air missile that was on one of the planes behind him. It fired off and caused this terrible conflagration. Now, because I talked to crewmen on the forest stall, they knew that, McCain, when you had severely injured burn victims, McCain was the first one airlifted off by helicopter to the nearby USS Oriskany because there were members of the crew that knew what he did and wanted to kill him. These are their words, not mine.
And he was the admiral's son.
And he's the admiral's, and grandfather was an admiral. And to make a long story short, people say, "Oh, what the Navy Board of Inquiry shows is plane had its engines parked out over the over the side of the carrier." Well, his dad was able to basically fix that Board of Inquiry report to make his son come out looking like a rose. And it wasn't long after that McCain got shot down over North Vietnam. And here's where we pick up another interesting story. And this came out of a Russian Moscow Post back in 2008 when he was running for president. A KGB officer remembered seeing McCain in the city of Voronezh in southern Russia, near Ukraine. It was then the USSR, and his nickname was called Jack Mouse. And they quoted the commandant of the Hanoi Hilton that said, "Yeah, McCain was here for a while. The Soviets came and took him to interrogate him in the Soviet Union, and he wasn't returned until 1972, and the following year, and that was in preparation for the release of the POWs after the Paris Accord." So we've got McCain pinpointed in Voronezh, where he received very good medical treatment for his injuries from Soviet doctors, and the KGB. He was such a willing. Oh, he was also known by several of his colleagues in the Hanoi Hilton. They called him Songbird McCain because he was telling the North Vietnamese everything they wanted to know. And one person I talked to who was there said he gave 6 months worth of Navy operational flight plans for the bombing missions over North Vietnamese, which is much more than name, rank, and serial number.
Yeah, it definitely is. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back in 4 minutes with Wayne Madsen. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Wayne Madsen. We're talking about some of the dirt on America's top politicians, and I use the term top very loosely. We're talking about John McCain, whose history is not what you have been told it is by the corporate media. We were getting into his nickname in the Hanoi Hilton, Songbird, and I'm sure you're aware, Wayne, that finally one of these tapes that he did make, propaganda tapes from North Vietnam, finally surfaced. Supposedly it was misfiled, but it's been discovered, and it's out there on YouTube. The only reason John McCain was not tried for treason was Richard Nixon issued a blanket pardon to all the returning POWs.
Yes, and so, we know that he spent time, and the thing is, when he was in the Soviet Union, they were obviously trying to program him to be a future agent in the United States, knowing his connections with his father. And I think the reason he has got this real attitude about Russia, it's a phobia. It's almost like a psychological problem for him, is that he's probably, it's the Manchurian Candidate effect, but, it messed up. in his case.
Yes.
And he's got some severe mental issues. Now, of course, we should remember that he was also one of the Keating Five.
Yes.
Senate Ethics Committee really treated those people with kid gloves. McCain was apparently more involved in taking money from Charles Keating's and his SNL than any of the other members of the Keating Five, but he was allowed to skate on that, because he uses this war hero record as a crutch.
Yes.
When in fact that shouldn't mean anything. Look, so make a long story short, all this information is available to people, especially now in the Trump administration. So, it's funny how he always, he'll put up resistance, but when he's faced with the facts, it's like one of the crewmen of the Forrestal told me when he met him in South Carolina right before the primary that year. He mentioned that he was on the Forrestal with McCain, and he said McCain turned as white as a sheet and just wanted to get away from this fellow.
Yeah.
Was just petrified. As far as Lindsey Graham, I remember having a discussion in the National Press Club in Washington with two reporters from the state newspaper. Now, that's the paper of record in South Carolina. They cover politics in Columbia, the state capital, and they were pretty upset. They said, why isn't anyone up here in Washington reporting on our senator alternate lifestyle? And where that wouldn't mean anything in a state like California, Massachusetts, New York. It definitely means something in South Carolina, the state that hosts Bob Jones University, for example. And I said, well, we haven't heard anything. We have our suspicions. Well, it's more, everyone in Washington knows about this, and I would imagine there's actually people who would be willing to come out and state that they had affairs with Lindsey Graham. So, if this is mentioned to him, this could ruin him in his home state of South Carolina. Again, he finally complied on the Tillerson nomination. As far as Marco Rubio is concerned, during the presidential campaign, some photographs of him surfaced where he was in these foam baths and gay nightclubs.
Yeah, I remember those.
In South Beach, Miami. Again, maybe that's not a big deal in South Beach, which is a gay community, but Florida's a weird state. The further north you go, the more south you get. And it doesn't play well north of Orlando. This whole thing, of course, it turns out that one of his friends from college turned out later he started running or at least leasing his place, one of his places he owned in Miami, to a guy who did live streaming of male gay sex videos. So the more Marco tries to say he has nothing to do with it, the worse it gets for him. So again, he was the last person, holdout Republican, who said, I have reservations about Tillerson, but I'm going to vote to confirm him. So this is how it works, and that's the reason, of course, why Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio's presidential campaigns went nowhere.
Well, I don't know who was behind this, but I've often been thinking about Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Roberts, who was adamantly opposed to Obamacare, was going to vote against it, and all of a sudden, at the 11th hour, he does a complete 180, casts the deciding vote on the Supreme Court to make Obamacare legal, and then he leaves for a week's vacation in Malta to duck the press. And it feels like somebody had the dirt on him as well. And it may be that the culture in Washington, D.C. is you're not allowed to rise above a certain level unless you do something that makes you blackmailable and controllable. And maybe that's a big part of what's behind all of these allegations of pedophilia. Maybe it's a rite of passage where you have to do something like that, where they've got the means to destroy you if you dare disobey.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And, it was old Governor Edwards, Edwin Edwards of Louisiana, who did some time in the federal penitentiary for corruption, but he's famously quoted as saying, as far as he was concerned, at one time in Louisiana, the only way they could destroy him politically is that if they found him in bed with a dead woman or a live boy. But you know, I mean, I think there's a lot of this blackmail that goes on in Washington. Not all of it's sexual related. A lot of it is, though, but a lot of it's financial as well. People taking dirty money, for example.
Yes.
And their fingerprints, these members of Congress and cabinet, their fingerprints are still on it. You know, so yeah, it's DC's it should stand for dirty capital, because that's really what it is.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and I know that a lot of people are very nervous over the possibility of the Clinton Foundation being investigated. There was apparently this insider was posting anonymously to this blog saying that it was just a giant slush fund, tax avoidance scheme, money laundering, and all of the top people in Washington, D.C. on both parties were dirty with this. And so I think they're very nervous about Jeff Sessions being our new Attorney General. And I think it's time that this does get decisively dealt with, not out of a spirit of revenge, but because we have to send a message to future generations of politicians that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated anymore.
Yeah, and I saw a recent report. There may be some links now between the Clinton Foundation and the CIA. Not enough there for me to add it to the book, at least the second edition, but I think it's something we have to look at, because when you get $25 million from Saudi Arabia and $10 million from the United Arab Emirates, you know, that pretty soon that adds up to real money. And we know one of the things I found out getting back to the book is the CIA was involved in a number of slush funds over the years. A Nugan Bank out of Australia. Yeah. That turned into Enron, and then we got Stanford International Bank out of Antigua. So we see a number of these slush fund activity. BCCI, I forgot to mention. Yeah. One of the biggest ones.
Yeah, and I would be surprised if the CIA wasn't involved with the Clinton Foundation, especially when you remember that both the Clintons and the Bushes all go back, their political fortunes all go back to Arkansas in the 1980s, and that CIA gun and drug running operation down to Nicaragua that was funded by bringing cocaine back. And so they're all sort of joined at the hip in that regard.
That's right, and William Casey actually flew to Little Rock when Clinton was governor and said, thanks for all you've done out of Mina, the airfield, which was used for this smuggling operation. He said, I understand you've always wanted to be president of the United States, and you know, we will arrange that, and you can consider that done. And of course, he became president in 1993 after he defeated a former CIA director, George H.W. Bush.
Yes, he did. Of course, George H.W. Bush needed to get out of the White House anyway after his first term, because that investigation into that whole Iran-Contra gun and drug running mess was getting closer and closer to him. And so he needed the heat to be taken off, and just said, yeah, we'll throw the White House to the one Democrat we can guarantee will keep our dirty little secrets about what was going on in Arkansas. Richard Nixon did exactly the same thing. When it became obvious he was going to have to step down from office, the first thing he did was get rid of Spiro Agnew and get Gerald Ford to be the vice president, because Gerald Ford had served on the Warren Commission and knew that the real deep, dark secret behind the Watergate break-in was destroying evidence that linked Nixon to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So Gerald Ford comes on in, issues a blanket pardon, says our long national nightmare is over, and the secrets get buried again.
And pardons Nixon in the process. Which,
yeah, well, not just Nixon. Blanket pardon for everybody involved. They did not want any more investigations that was going to risk that. We have a caller on the line, Stephen in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, excellent show. You know, this is the John McCain story is a prime example of how the government, rather than face the embarrassment, that's the reason why this whole thing was hushed up, was the embarrassment. They didn't know how to deal with the embarrassment of a high-ranking officer, his father being an admiral, U.S. Navy admiral, and didn't know how to face this. Of course, an admiral leading, being a leader over men, and the shame of basically, the cowardice ways of and singing like a canary McCain. They didn't know how to deal with that embarrassment, so they rewrote history for us to tell us do the spin now instead of being a coward and a whistleblower and telling, aiding the enemy. They decided to rewrite history and make him out to be a hero.
And the corporate media went along with that, just like they always do.
And I would add, and the caller's right, I would add that 2 senators were also the key senators to supposedly work on the POW and MIA issue. Now, I know for a fact that some of the stories of MIAs in Southeast Asia were put out by people who wanted to make a fast buck if they could sell this information. However, there were some reports that looked like they were fairly reliable. And of course, here we have John McCain and John Kerry, who are best of friends, are the 2 senators who basically did everything they could to suppress any authentic and reliable report on POWs or MIAs still being present, not only in North Vietnam, but in Laos and Cambodia, and also even in Thailand.
Well, that was financial. The U.S., after the war in Vietnam was over, the U.S. Simply reneged on their reparations payments, and Vietnam kept the POWs, and the U.S. just thought it was going to be cheaper and cost-saving to pretend the POWs never existed. And that was where that all came from. They literally sold our kids out in order to save a few bucks.
Right. And as I say, here's another example of McCain, with a lot of dirt on his hands with these MIA POWs.
Okay, so Steve, anything else?
No, that's it. I'm quite certain also when you talk about election fraud, I would love to look at Arizona's election. I can't see how this guy gets in every
I get a lot of emails from people in Arizona saying they don't know anybody who's voting for this guy, but we need to remember election fraud is not confined to the presidential race. And and we know that the CIA is certainly very much involved in rigging elections in other countries, and probably this one as well. And I would like to know...
Let's just hope in 4 years that's what happens.
Well,
a revision, overhaul.
Absolutely. Thank you for the call, Steve. We're going to let you go. Wayne, there's a question right now. Getting on back to your book about CIA front and proprietary companies, are any of the CIA's proprietary companies involved in the business of building and using these electronic voting machines that you're aware of?
Yes. There's so many companies listed in this. It's 388 pages. But one I remember is Shooptronics. Now that goes back to the days before these touchscreen Shooptronic machines were where they use them in New York. I remember they used to use them in New Jersey. You would go into the voting machine and you would pull the curtain back, and you would actually pull a lever to register your vote. This was like an electromechanical voting machine. But yes, the Shooptronics was basically a partner of the CIA. So we're talking about possibly them interfering with elections back when the Shooptronics machines were...
Well, that would have certainly allowed Casey to walk into Bill Clinton's gubernatorial office and say, "You're going to be president. It's a done deal."
Absolutely, absolutely. And anyone else who we know was basically in the pocket of the CIA back in those days.
All righty, we're going to take one more phone call here. Well, we've got 2 more phone calls real quick. Bob in Michigan, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I saw a thing on cable TV about in 1990 about John McCain, and they had North Vietnamese guys that captured him and whatever. And apparently he had broke both of his arms because he improperly ejected from his airplane. And even worse, he was one of the only people to gain weight while he was in this prison camp.
Yes.
Well,
explain that.
Yeah.
There's only one way you gain weight.
So you figure at the time he was in Voronezh, which was probably at least a few years, he was probably being fed all that very starchy Russian food, which is a lot of potatoes. And then when he comes back, of course, in preparation to be handed over, he's a heck of a lot. He's a heck of a lot heavier than the other poor POWs who remained the whole time in Hanoi. But you're right. Yeah, that's true. Both of his arms were broken. They were apparently set very badly by the North Vietnamese doctors, but then they tried to correct that. One of the things you got with Soviet medical treatment in Voronezh was better treatment for those broken bones. But yeah, he did not eject properly, because you're supposed to. You would actually reach up over your forehead and pull down this device, and you had to keep your elbows almost together. If you had them out, you would, All
right, Wayne, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today here. We've been talking with Wayne Madsen, investigative journalist and author. He's got this new book out, and why don't you give us the rundown on the book and where it can be found again?
Yes, it's called The Almost Classified Guide to CIA Front Companies, Proprietaries, and Contractors. Available on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, Lulu Press, and at my website, WayneMadsenReport.com.
WayneMadsenReport.com here. Well, we got about another 2-3 minutes here. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I just one of the things that I know we had this big issue with Mike Pompeo being the new CIA director. It was my conclusion after writing the book and seeing just how endemic the CIA is in so many facets of the American social and political, religious, entertainment, you name it, the whole infrastructure. I don't think this is the agency that Harry Truman anticipated. As a matter of fact, he once wrote an op-ed suggesting that just a few weeks after Kennedy's assassination. I think it's time to not mend the CIA. I think it's time to end it. Just get rid of it. Just like in the Soviet Union, they got rid of the KGB. They got rid of the Stasi in East Germany. You got the only way to deal with these huge agencies is to just get rid of them and start over with something more acceptable.
I absolutely agree with that, because once any agency gets past a certain size, they become a danger to the nation. I can think of no better example than the NSA, with its constant illegal spying on law-abiding Americans, a violation of the Fourth Amendment, as well as a hideous waste of resources to spend all your time watching people who aren't doing anything wrong, instead of focusing your limited resources on those people who are actually doing something wrong, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Oh, wait a minute, that's right, they actually work for the U.S. government. So, but yeah, and this gets back to the warning that Eisenhower had in his farewell address about the military-industrial complex, because today it's not just the military-industrial complex, it's the security-industrial complex, it's the pharmaceutical-industrial complex. You get these large groups of organizations and people who feast on the taxpayers' money, and they will spend all their effort just getting more and more access to that flow of cash, and they're not really concerned about anything other than that. Department of Homeland Security is out of control. TSA has destroyed tourism around our nation and have yet to actually find a single real terrorist. And they still owe me a laptop for Seattle as well as that. Anyway, we're coming up on the end of the show. Wayne, I'm going to say goodbye here. Thank you very much for spending time with us today, and I look forward to having you back in the near future.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have less technical glitches as well for that. So coming up here, we are now getting word that Donald Trump is handing down regulations against government agencies making their own pronouncements on social media, which I think, given how hostile the establishment is to him, I think it was a smart thing to do. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with everybody that you know. Aloha, America.